and welcome to the Puget Sound Estuarium's Discovery Speaker Series. My name is Clarissa. I'm the Program and Volunteer Coordinator for the Estuarium. And we run this series every first Thursday of the month, starting with October, going all the way through March of next year. They'll be at 6:30 p.m. and we'll either have artists, scientists, educators, or Earth advocates talk about their current work or research or organization so that we can help spark conversations in our community. So if you have any questions at all, make sure that if you're on Zoom, you type those questions into our Q&A. If you are on Facebook Live, you can type your questions into the comments below this video, and we will get those transferred over to us so that we can answer your questions live. We will also be, this presentation will go 45 minutes, and then the last 15 minutes will be when we will answer those questions. So you can type them out now once you have them in your head, or you can save them for the end when we start taking questions. We also have a fun coloring page to go along with this talk. Miranda is posting that to our website and on Facebook so that you can print it out and color it while you're watching, or you can color it later on because this will be recorded, and so you can watch it on Facebook Live. At the end, you can restart it, or on YouTube, we will be posting the video as well. So if you miss it or have to leave early or know someone who would really enjoy this talk, then you can send them to that Facebook link or to the YouTube link to watch it at a later time. So for those watching on Zoom, thanks for coming. Make sure you can type your questions into that Zoom Q&A. If you're watching on Facebook Live, welcome. You can type your questions or comments into the comment section below the video. Today, we are very excited for our second Discovery Speaker Series of this season, and we have Brian Footen with us. If you ever wish that you could see a map of the shoreline like you could with Google Street View, well, now you can. Thanks to Brian Footen and his friend Scott Gallagher, you can use EarthViews to see the shoreline as if it was Google Street View. So with conservation in mind, they've been working to map the shoreline to raise awareness about conservation issues within our waterways. He is now the executive director of the new EarthViews Conservation Society. There we go. EarthViews Conservation Society. And so today we'll hear about his mapping projects with the Puget Sound and other ones. And so I want to give Brian a huge thank you for joining us today. And we are so excited to hear about the EarthViews Conservation Society's mission to empower waterway conservation. You can get started whenever you're ready.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Clarissa, for the introduction, and thank you, Puget Sound Estuarium folks, for having me. I'm super honored and humbled to be able to talk about the work that we've been doing through EarthViews and the EarthViews Conservation Society. So a little bit about myself. I am familiar with Olympia, as I was talking about earlier. I spent my undergraduate at Evergreen State College, and then I went to graduate school at the MES program, Master of Environmental Studies program, as well as the University of Washington School of Fisheries. And I spent over 20 years doing salmon ecology, salmon behavior, fisheries research, mostly with tribes, local tribes, Muckleshoot tribe, and also with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So I kind of came into this whole idea of using mobile mapping technology with kind of a scientific bent, looking for a way to bring a lot of the folks that I worked with that never made it out into the field very much, a way for them to experience these places that they that are not easy to access. And over time, that just kind of became a bigger vision about, well, being able to see these places is really important, and that can really empower not just scientists but everyone to maybe want to help protect these places more. So let me go ahead and share my screen and kind of get into my spiel and go through a few slides about how the work came about, and then I can do some demonstrations of some of the areas that we've mapped. So just to check, can everyone see my screen? Thumbs up. All right. So yeah, so like Clarissa said, we're going to use this technology to kind of empower waterway conservation and fill in the gaps in the maps. Um, so when I was working as a fishery scientist, I was super excited about having the opportunity to go back to over 100-year-old photographs that were taken by these dudes who hauled these box cameras way out into the field. These USGS guys, they were surveying the Northwest for the first time and documenting it. And they would haul these cameras, out into the field, and it would take them days to get there, days to get back. They were taking on glass plates, hard to develop, super ambitious work. But it was the most advanced technology they had at the time to kind of tell the story of some of the places that they were seeing. And as a result of that, it may not look like much, but I mean, this is Deception Pass, back over 100 years ago. And so you get a portal into what these areas look like. And I would use that information to kind of see what the shorelines look like and see what the rivers look like, to try and understand what habitat conditions were like a long time ago. Um, and so having that information was really important for the work I was doing, and just from a historical documentation standpoint as well. Um, so, you know, zoom to the future, and yay, Google went around San Francisco about 15 years ago with 360 cameras on top of cars and started creating this virtual street view experience. So the only, you get in a car, you drive around, and you can create what you see here. This is this is actually the bridge going over Deception Pass, and then down here is the water where that other picture was taken from a boat. But if you're familiar with Google Street View, you can grab the little peg guy, put him over a map, and everything lights up. But the water doesn't light up. There's only very, very few, less than 1% of waterways before we started in the country had been mapped by anyone doing 360 type imagery. Google had mostly done it. They'd done a little bit of the Colorado and a few other showcase areas. Um, so, what we were saying, as we started to realize that this kind of imagery could be important, was, our waterways deserve at least as much consideration from a modern mapping standpoint as our streets do. And, that's a problem that we need to solve. In fact, it was a problem that I realized needed to be solved while I was doing fisheries work, because I would be in meetings where people would actually go to Street View maps to try and get a better view of some of the shoreline areas they were trying to understand, or riverbanks and things like that, to try and look across the river to see a restoration site or something like that, to try and understand what the habitat looked like from that intuitive surface level perspective that you don't get from the aerial view. You can only get so much, right? So, we set forth with EarthViews, and to do EarthViews, we started out with a bunch of GoPro cameras that we broke open and tied wires together, and um, you know, used like Raspberry Pis. They're called little computers that made them go off simultaneously. And it was a real like duct tape and baling wire kind of operation for a couple of years as we were doing research and development and trying to come, we're not Google, right? So we were trying to prove to investors that we were going to be Google though. So we had to come up with some pilots. And so we went out and finally got a system working. So, the way it would work would be every 10 seconds, the 360 camera that we had made would go off, and then we bring a water quality meter with us, and it would log water quality measurements every 10 seconds. And an underwater picture would be taken every 10 seconds. So those were really all meshed together in an application that was kind of like Street View that you go and experience everything. A couple things, I wanted to keep in mind that this was going to be a social venture, even though we had investors and we were a for-profit company as EarthViews, I wanted to make sure that everything we mapped was open and visible to the public. So we always made that kind of a deal. And we had a vision then to connect people with waterways. And as time went on, we came into the COVID period and the pandemic, and our contracts had really slowed down. And so, you know, I was like, I'm not going to stop. you know, we need to keep mapping. And so what needs to be mapped just because it needs to be mapped, not because we have a contract to do it. Everyone's quarantined, so I'm just going to throw some gear on my kayak and go out and start doing this. Because again, these pictures, this imagery is really important. I like to say, it doesn't take charts and graphs to tell the story of some of the conservation challenges that these waterways are facing, right? You can just see it when you go to them. And because imagery is so powerful, right here, it talks about people being able to remember 2,000 pictures with 90% accuracy over a period of several days. That's powerful stuff. So seeing really is believing, and seeing is going to really help people understand how important these places are. So that was kind of the vision. And so I got a kayak, threw a camera on it. This is an example here. By the way, the technology came to us over the years, over the 5-year period before I went on Puget Sound and started mapping. GoPro developed a 360 camera called the GoPro Max that's as big as a deck of cards. It's got a lens on either side of it, and boom, there you go, off the shelf. Has the same resolution we were getting with our crazy system that we built, and we could scale with that. We even send it out to people to help map. So citizen science programs are in place. The Georgia River Network has like a couple cameras, and they mapped 1,000 miles of rivers in Georgia with it, that they send the data to EarthViews and it gets mapped. So yeah, so there's a camera up here on a tripod, an underwater camera off the front of the kayak, and a water quality meter that goes in the water, and all that data is collected simultaneously every 10 seconds and geolocated and then put on a map. And so I guess I'll pop out now and go over some of the examples I have. Sorry, I'm moving some of this Zoom stuff around so I can see. So you can go to earthviewsociety.org to see what we're doing at EarthViews Conservation Society. Essentially, what EarthViews Conservation Society did is took the active documentation and the mapping part of what EarthViews was doing, and said, hey, look, because of what I started doing on Puget Sound, was getting such great positive feedback. The press was excited about it. The stakeholders were excited about it. As a matter of fact, the sponsor, a Senate bill was sponsored, 5885, to have the near shore of Puget Sound mapped every 2 years using 360 imagery. So this conservation-minded way of doing this work and starting to map places just because they needed to be done to help shine a light on them was really taking off. And we noticed that and decided that EarthViews would be better served EarthViews for-profit company would be better served as a data processing hub and a data acquisition hub, a GIS company, if you will, geographic information system, or a professional services company. And if we wanted to best serve the mission of conservation, we should go full on. And I should just leave EarthViews as president and take over as executive director of this conservation society. So that's what we did. And in that process, I took a lot of the work I was doing in the Puget Sound, that same model, and I took it to the Western US where the mega drought is happening over the last summer and spring. And I mapped the Great Salt Lake and part of Lake Powell and the Rio Grande and Lake Tahoe, and just had the same kind of engagement and the same kind of excitement about that work when I went to those places. So if you go to the EarthViews Conservation site, you can learn about our mission. You can see some of the press that we've gotten about the work that we're doing, and you can explore the documented waterways. And when you do that, you'll get a map, right? So like I said before, at EarthViews, I was interested in making sure everything we did was public. And so we have this atlas, we call it, and all these blue areas are areas that we've mapped around the country. And in a partnership with National Geographic, Okavango Wilderness Project over here in Africa, they took a 360 camera down the mega transects that they mapped along the Okavango Delta, and we mapped all their data and imagery for them at EarthViews. So there's like over 6,000 miles of rivers and shores that can be explored around the country. And here's what I was talking about with Georgia River Network, where they took one of our cameras and put it on a canoe and started paddling all around the rivers in Georgia. So you can explore 1,000 miles of rivers in Georgia. But you can zoom in here to the Puget Sound region and start to see some of the areas that have been mapped in Puget Sound, and particularly the Puget Sound Nearshore. So all this blue is areas that I've mapped along the Puget Sound Nearshore. Started out phase one going from Seattle to Olympia, and then for phase two, I went from Olympia to Shelton, and now I'm going from Shelton to Bainbridge. And I started this isn't my full-time gig, right? This is when I can get out there and when the weather allows. It can't be raining, it can't be too windy. And I started this last September, October. So it's been a little over a year. I've made it 700 miles, and I've got 700 more miles to go to capture. What we're going to do is cut it off right here at Port Townsend, right? So just across the southern end of Whidbey Island, and we'll just do this lower part of the sound. That's the goal, including Hood Canal. So just continue to chip away. So anyone can go here and click on these blue areas and end up somewhere in the Puget Sound that's been mapped. For example, here's what the application looks like, right? So if you were to click on one of those blue lines on the atlas, it would take you to a place in Puget Sound. This is a place a little north of Tacoma along the near shore. One other thing I didn't mention is that, so what we have here is, an image, a 360 image like Google Street View. You can look around up and down and click on, the arrows to go backwards and forwards. And over here on the right side, you have a map. And this is an Esri ArcGIS online map. So Esri is one of the largest mapping companies in the world, GIS companies in the world. And we partnered with them when we first started, because again, I didn't want this just to be Street View for rivers, right? I wanted my colleagues to be able to have a tool that they could use. We took water quality information. We want to be able to map things as well, which would include, different layers of information that you can add to the map. So that's why we partnered with Esri, so that we could have a map here that would be capable of doing more than just showing where you're at. So I think one of the things that's interesting about this spot and why I picked it to showcase right away is this is bank armoring along the shore of Puget Sound here. And it covers nearly 70% of the shoreline of Puget Sound. And it's most of Puget Sound is privately owned as well. So this is an incredible conservation challenge that's being faced in terms of Puget Sound recovery. What happens with bank armoring is it interrupts the land-water interface so that the beaches erode easier. The energetics from the waves are harder on the rocks. And so marine life like seagrass can't propagate there as easily. The nutrients from debris and wood that would fall into the waterway um, is taken away. So it's a big deal in terms of Puget Sound recovery, having an understanding of where this bank armoring is, what its impacts are, and trying to find places where you can engage with landowners to see what different options you can have. So like here, you notice this armoring set back a little bit that allows for a little bit of a beach. There's ways to design bank armoring. Again, same up here. If you zoom in, you can see the setback of the armoring to allow for beach at high tide. There's a lot of different designs that are in play that can help with bank armoring. So I wanted to take us to another area. This is underneath the Sound and Arrows Bridge. And I chose this area because along all the areas that I've been, this was one of the very few areas where I saw bull kelp beds, which they're becoming rarer and rarer in Puget Sound, but they're incredibly important um, for habitat for juvenile fish to rear in and to evade predation from other predators. So these bull kelp beds, and they're great sources of CO2 sinks. They absorb carbon um, to help with climate change and decrease the acidity in the water of the Puget Sound. So they're super important for the Puget Sound ecology. And recently, the state legislature passed a bill to help um, recover these bull kelp beds in greater numbers, and they're out there trying to find out where they are now, and hopefully they're able to use some of this imagery to try and see what where these beds are. Um, so I did want to point out the bull kelp beds, and again, for juvenile fish who are particularly juvenile salmon who are being born, down here in South Sound, they have to make their way all the way up out of the Puget Sound, and there's not a lot of habitat for them to evade predators. So it's a tough journey for them when they try and get out to the ocean from South Puget Sound. And having these areas like bull kelp beds are real important for them. And this is just a really cool view of the bridge. It was super fast. I don't know if anyone's ever been on the water there in the narrow strait, but the water, you can see kind of how it's moving, the current's moving. All of the Puget Sound goes through this little narrow channel here where the bridge is. So the currents get really, really high. So the next place I wanted to take, we were just talking about this before we went live, was right here. This is down at the southern tip of Butt Inlet in Olympia. And this is the fish ladder / dam that keeps water in Capitol Lake and bifurcates the salt water from intruding into Capitol Lake and keeps Capitol Lake fresh and the salt water out. So, and this is the outlet for the Deschutes River, I believe. So recently there was a decision made after a long time to take down this barrier and restore the estuary. This used to be an estuary before the dam was built, to restore this estuary here in Capitol Lake. And that's going to be super cool. So now you can kind of, go explore this area and see what it looks like now. And I hope to get into Capitol Lake before the work starts so that we can map the current conditions of Capitol Lake and then see what it looks like and keep going back and see the change over time. That's one of the great things about this kind of work, is when we go back, we get to see how habitat changes over time. Also here, I encountered, you know, I'll say that I know that there's whole organizations, the Puget Soundkeepers and others, who do really great work in terms of taking garbage out of Puget Sound. And either they're doing a really good job, or in general, I mean, when you think about New York Harbor, I've been around a lot of places around the country, and I've picked probably 3 plastic water bottles out of Puget Sound in 700 miles, and really just have not seen a lot of floating garbage comparatively to other places. But at this particular place here, I'm not disparaging Olympia at all, but I did come across some of one of the biggest garbage piles. Let's see, we can zoom in. You can click on this blue line, by the way, and navigate to anywhere on the blue line. So if you see a thumbnail of a place you want to go to, you click on that blue line and it'll take you there. Um, so yeah, here I am taking out this derelict net that was on in the intertidal area on the shore zone in the near shore, certainly probably causing problems. And there's another grocery cart and some other things that I hauled up and just took them out of the near shore area so that they wouldn't be swept away by the water. Um, but again, like I said, that area, and then I did come across some derelict aquaculture gear in Totten Inlet that I won't be able to show you today. I don't. I was looking around for it earlier and I couldn't find, but a big stretch of the near shore. I don't know if you're familiar with how they do aquaculture. They used to use these nets that they would put over the beach to protect the clams from the predators. And a lot of times when they're not farming there anymore, those nets just get left behind. And there's a lot of that in South Sound in some of the aquaculture areas that I bumped into. And the great thing about this is you can go, hey, maybe I can see where some of those are, and talk to folks who can help do something about that, right? Okay, let's go back to Tacoma, because what was really cool was when I got permission from the port, I was able to go in close up to these giant freighters, right? They're like 5 stories tall. They're just huge, and you don't really get the feeling of just how big all this is when you're looking at it from the shoreline. So it was pretty amazing to to come up against these guys and be right next to them. It's just like, oh my goodness, getting swallowed up by a giant freighter. Um, but what I did notice also in Tacoma was, one thing we do is, so like I said before, we take water quality measurements. So every 10 seconds, there's a water quality data sonde, and it's taking dissolved oxygen and temperature and pH and total dissolved solids and resistivity, a bunch of different water quality parameters that can help guide people to understand what the conditions are at this spot that you're looking at. So you can click on the metadata table and it'll show you all the different parameters that were of data that were collected for this location. So at this location, the temperature, the pH was 7.8, and the salinity was 23. Because we're in saltwater, obviously it was high. Dissolved oxygen was 7. So you can get a feel for what the conditions are at that spot. Another thing you can do is you can chart that information, right? So if you open up this charting feature and choose, say, pH, it's going to show you the pH values for everything that, okay. So everything that's in the blue line that's being captured on the screen here. So if you watch this red arrow, it's going to show you where you're at on the survey. So it's survey miles on the x-axis and pH on the y-axis. So here you can see the red arrow moving along, coming down into Commencement Bay, and you can, look for anomalies in the data and see where you see spikes. Um, you know, and go to those spots. So like right here, there's a higher pH. So if you click on that area, you can go to that spot and say, what is it about this area that may be increasing the pH there? Um, and if you look around, this is the mouth of the Puyallup River, right, where the Weyerhaeuser paper pulp mill is. So I'm not saying that that's the result of higher pH in that area, but what it does is, if you're a scientist, you can say, um, this is an area we might want to do more monitoring at, just by the anomaly that we're seeing at that location. And it was a beautiful day. There's Mount Rainier in the background. So yeah, this is a really interesting place here. What's left of the delta of the Puyallup River, right? This little spit here. So what's interesting is I'm going to skip around here because I was going to go talk about the animal counts that I do. When I go along, when I see animals, I geolocate the animals that I see so we can have points where all the different types of animals that I see are on the map. I'll show that in just a second. But because we're here at this estuary that's highly developed, um, I wanted to pop over to the Billy Frank Jr. Nisqually Wildlife Refuge, National Wildlife Refuge, and see an area where this is one of my favorite places that I've mapped so far in Puget Sound, just because one of the greatest restoration projects that's been done in Puget Sound occurred here when, I don't know if you all are familiar, but this used to be all farmland and cattle grazing, and it was created by dikes that kept the salt water from intruding into the land here. So you can see these dead trees. These used to be deciduous trees that died because the saltwater intrusion happened after they took out all the dikes to restore the Nisqually Delta. And this is just an incredible opportunity um, to be able to, it's off limits to boating. So this is an incredible opportunity to be able to really, click around and explore, what this area looks like now and how the restoration, how effective it is. And again, please, this is off limits. Don't bring your kayak in here. You got to time it, just even if you were to not know that it's off limits and you went in here, you have to time it just right. If the tide goes out and you get caught in here, you can't step out of the kayak because it goes up to your knees and in muck, and you'll be stuck there all day waiting for the tide to come in. And it's a national wildlife refuge. So I saw, a dozen eagles in here or more, and lots of seals, and it was just an incredible place to be. It's like I said, again, one of my favorite places in Puget Sound in terms of, I call this landscape scale restoration because it was such a giant space that was being restored. And the juvenile Chinooks that are going to come out of this Nisqually River are going to come in here. They're going to rear. They're going to get to a bigger size because they have this restored estuary with more food sources in it. And then they're going to make that daunting trip that we talked about up along the shoreline um, to try and get out of Puget Sound. And they're not going to bump into bull kelp until they get to the Narrows Bridge for habitat. So it's still really hard for them. And like I was talking about before, I do animal counts, right? So if I see cormorants or eagles or seals, um, I count those animals, and then they get geolocated, and you can see those counts using these layers on the map, right? So if you start clicking on different layers, there's the cormorants, where the cormorants are, there's where the mergansers, here's where I saw an osprey, porpoises here, and you start clicking on all these different animals, you can see where they're located, and you can zoom in and you can start to see patterns really in terms of where they congregate and where they don't congregate. And what I really noticed during this was that there was this one stretch here where, for a long ways, for a few miles, there just was no animals at all. It was kind of odd. And so if you go to that area, you can see that it's this area where the railroad runs along the near shore of Puget Sound. And so it's armored the whole way. Even at low tide, the water's still up against armoring because the armoring's so high, where the railroad stays high off the water. And so, the trains go by a lot. It's just a really inhospitable area for animals to be. Usually you see cormorants or mergansers or other marine birds in these areas, and I just didn't see anything there. But you can click on these different shapes, and it'll tell you what the observation number was, when it was collected, um, and how many there were. So this is porpoises right here. So I saw 15 porpoises in this spot, and you can zoom in right there. That's where they were. Click on the blue line and go to that spot and say, oh, okay, this is what it looked like where we saw all those porpoises. Sometimes it gives you insight about habitat that may be relative to the animals, and sometimes it doesn't. But it's interesting that way. Okay, so winding down here, I was able to get permission from the Squaxin Island tribe to map around Squaxin Island. So um, it, again, these are not places that are regularly accessed or easy to access, right? So that's one of the special things about this kind of work is it gives everyone the opportunity to check these places out. But I did want to remind people just the same with Nisqually is that um, Squaxin Island is off limits, right? So you can't get out of your kayak, you can't go on Squaxin Island, you can't dig clams. They're pretty serious about that. But it's an incredible example, how we talked at the beginning about bank armoring and the problems that it causes. You could really get to have a look at what areas should look like in Puget Sound that have been undisturbed for a very long time. Maybe this was what it was like, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, before settlement. And you can see some of the natural processes taking place in terms of debris coming into the water, and beaches still being formed. This is at high tide, so you don't get to see it, as much of it. There's a lot of it underwater, which I bump into all the time. um, but yeah, you can really get a good feel for what conditions look like on a natural shoreline. And I'm not saying this is the only place in Puget Sound where that happens. I know there's plenty of other beaches where we still have some of that interface, that water land interface still functional. But this is just one that is pretty special because it's this entire large island and it's that way all the way around. But you just can't get away from some of the problems that we have in Puget Sound. And one of those is let's see if I can remember where this is. I believe it's around here. Um, so this was, I talked about derelict shellfish gear, but there's also derelict vessels in Puget Sound, which is a big topic. Um, I'm going to try and see if I can locate it. I mean, it's one of those things where you just wouldn't know it's there unless you're able to have this kind of view. So let's see. Sorry, I should have tagged this. Um, anyway, trust me, there's right in here somewhere. It's it's pretty stark when it pops out at you. That's why I'm taking this time to show it, because it surprised me when I came upon it. Yeah, it's right up here. Thanks for your patience. If I don't get it this time, I'll stop. All right. So there's a derelict vessel along this shoreline. It's kind of like a a treasure hunt. You guys can go take a look at it after we're done and see if you can find it. Um, but yeah, that continues to be a problem. And I wanted to close out with the demonstration um, real quick. How am I doing on time? I got 5 minutes. Okay. This is one of my favorite places that I encountered so far along the trip. Um, it was just phenomenal. It's called Fish Trap Cove. And again, not an easy place to access. Um, it's just out here, just out past Boston Harbor. Um, and you zoom in on the map and this is what you get, right? But this is what this area right here looks like. At high tide, you can kayak all the way in here and just be in this magical place um, with these mushrooms growing on the logs. And believe it or not, a fish did jump out of the water here while I was coming through here. Um, but it's just super beautiful Pacific Northwest, Puget Sound jewel. And I'd love to close with that saying everything's wonderful here, right? But I'm not going to hide the fact that Puget Sound is in trouble. Um, and even though we have these places on the surface that look just epically, they are epically beautiful. If you were to go to the metadata table here and take a look at what the dissolved oxygen is. So innately, even under the best conditions, these type of little finger coves have dissolved oxygen problems, and especially south, the farther south you go, because the tidal exchange leaves behind the old unoxygenated water, right? So it's harder for that water to be exchanged. But when the tidal exchange also brings in um, low dissolved oxygen from the ocean, as well as low dissolved oxygen that occurs from extra nutrients coming into the water, the problem gets exacerbated. And what probably should be in the 5 or 4s in terms of parts per million for a healthy area in this spot is 3.2 parts milligrams per liter or parts per million. So 3.2 is pretty low. Probably why that fish was jumping out of the water, actually. It's not a place where a fish is going to want to hang out for very long. Um, so I'll just say that, if you go to this map, I would recommend you go to the Elwha River first. This is an area where we went and 48 hours, it was our very first pilot study. So 48 hours after the last of the dams came down, we went down the Elwha River. So you can see what the conditions of the river were like right after the dams came down. So this is a great place to check out. And something I didn't highlight before is there's these tags that are in here that users can put in or we put in to highlight certain areas. So you can go to these tags and search them. In this case, if you search Chinook, you can see an area where we captured one of the first Chinook to make it up past the dams to come to spawn. So this is our underwater camera right here that we're using, and that's the Chinook swing by. And there's what the tag gives you information. You can have pictures in these tags or links in these tags. And then if you go over here, when we do take underwater imagery, it's down in this left-hand corner and you click on that and it shows the picture of the fish. It happened to take a picture right when it swam by. So, and you can see more spawning taking place right in here and over here. So I would encourage you to explore um, the Elwha River and also take a look at some of the work that I did in the West here on the Great Salt Lake. If for nothing else, just to get an idea of a totally different place. This is the very northern part of the Great Salt Lake. And if you don't know, I'm sure it's been in the press, it's been pretty widely acknowledged, but it's shrinking, it's disappearing, right? So in this spot, I was dragging the kayak to get to the very northern part that the kayak would float in. And everything you see in all directions is in about 4 inches of water, 3 to 4 inches of water, because the bathymetry is so flat on the lake that there's just no depth there anymore, and the depth is even all the way across. So yeah, it's quite a remarkable alien environment, and I would encourage you to go check it out. Okay, I'll stop.
Thanks, Brian. That was amazing. That is such a cool feature to have, that anyone and everyone who has internet access can look at this and see in places that you're not allowed to go, and you can just look here and look at the shoreline and then compare it to somewhere else and even around the world. I'm speechless.
Thanks. I mean, I find myself just tooling around, great way to like kill some time or
Just going
procrastinate.
kayaking.
Yeah, procrastinate and go online and okay, I wonder what this river looks like, So
Well, we've got some questions for you. In our Zoom from another Brian, we have, is the feature service of this data available to put in one's own Esri Arc online maps?
oh man, a mapping nerd. I love it. We don't have an API that allows you to have a blue line in your Esri map and click on the spot and end up in there. You could actually have the track on an Esri ArcGIS online map easily. However, we do have another application that I'm not going to take the time to show right now that does allow, if you have an ArcGIS online account, it will allow you to see the areas that you map with our imagery and survey tracks overlaid on it. It's more of a scientific tool that we use for folks, but I'd love to connect with you and give you a link to that and demonstrate it if you wanted to do a private call sometime.
Oh, he's got more questions for you. Have you considered adding the Department of Ecology's shoreline photo viewer points as a layer for a wider oblique view of the areas you photographed?
So that's a lift, right? That's a programming lift, more than just adding their feature layer, and it doesn't. Yes, and I'd love to work with the Department of Ecology, and part of Senate Bill 5885 was with the Department of Ecology, so very, very well will be if it was held up in the Senate last year, but it's going to come back around for 2023. So it's very possible that we're going to go out and do this in 2023 with the Department of Ecology, and instead of their imagery being on our map, our imagery will be on their map. And so the obliques will be with our 360-degree imagery.
And then, to your knowledge, is there a ghost fishing group in Washington where volunteer divers locate and remove derelict fishing gear and other hazardous trash?
The Puget Sound Keeper organization are the ones that do a lot of the trash removal in Puget Sound. There's a big grant proposal out right now for derelict vessels identification and removal. I don't know about a ghost group, but I think there's still room. I think there's a lot of room for a smaller nonprofit to get busy and say, I just want to focus on South Sound derelict shellfish gear or something like that.
Are you hinting that the estuarium should do something?
Maybe so. Maybe so. Maybe we can partner.
Okay, we got questions coming in from Facebook. How did you navigate getting permission from the Puget Sound city's ports to go through and take images? It seems like that might be quite a process.
Um, they were very receptive. You know, the bottom line is it's public, it's a public waterway. I was being courteous. There's signs in certain areas that say you can't go, so I didn't, I wouldn't go there anyway because they told me where the sensitive areas were. Um, but no, they were receptive to it. They wanted to be able to have the access to be able to for free. By the way, I didn't get any support from them financially. Um, so they can now check out all their infrastructure and assets easily.
A win-win for them.
Right. Right.
And then I'm curious how much currents contribute to bringing trash to Olympia from other places. Currents tend to transport nutrients from other parts of Puget Sound to shallow bays. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, any place like the the um the extreme ends of these finger inlets or butt inlet, for example, wherever you have the end of the inlet where the tide brings things in and then goes out, it's going to leave stuff behind. It's a good point. That it's hard to say that where that net came from, although because the Chinook tend to pool there before they go up the fish ladder, I imagine that someone brought a net in to try and catch them.
So, what was your most favorite day out kayaking around Puget Sound? What happened?
Wow, that's a great question. Every day every day starts out as me being like, this is all I ever want to do with my life. And after about 6 hours, I'm like, where's my truck? So so I get a lot of oh, I wish I had that job, but it's an expedition and it's constant movement at 2 to 3 knots, sometimes against winds and tide. I gotta say, the most amazing experience that I had for a full day was really just exploring the Billy Frank Jr. National Nisqually Wildlife Refuge. From all realms, from the animal life that I saw, from the sounds that I heard, from the adventure of trying to time everything just right so I got in to those areas really far into the refuge and then was able to get back out in time, even though I got a headwind on the way out that picked up. Um, Lots of adventure.
Do you not have someone to pick you up at the end? Do you go back and then have to go back?
Um, Depends. Most of the time, I have volunteers or other folks that I work with who are there to shuttle me. Sometimes I've paddled back.
Oh,
Usually do 10 to 15 miles a day.
seems like a lot.
Well, I mean, for people who are real serious kayakers, this kind of a kayak is it's like a fishing kayak, right? So the reason I use it is because conditions can change rapidly, and I don't want to have to worry about getting flipped over. But there's those sleek, beautiful, sporty-looking sea kayaks that cut through the water at 7, 8 miles an hour when you're pushing them. I just go 2 or 3, but I go 2 or 3 also for a reason. We're trying to capture every 150 feet or so, um, or less. I mean, every 15 feet or so, excuse me. So you can have that experience, that immersive experience.
And so where to next? What other waterways would you like EarthViews to be mapping?
So, like I said earlier, we just kind of launched EarthViews Conservation Society. So we're in the process of standing that organization up and starting to go for um, organizational operational budgets and figuring out exactly what the next steps are. Part of what we're doing is as the part of the conservation program is really, you know, the core of it is this document, advocate, and predict mission. And you know, as part of that, we have to, you know, get together with a board and talk about those things. Where's where's the best place? Where are some of the most endangered places? Where's the best possible places that we can make a difference in? And we've been working with National Geographic. They've got a grant coming up that we're applying for. And what we want to do with that is, so everybody's talking about Lake Mead, right? In terms of the drought in the Western US and how Lake Mead is disappearing and it's not going to be able to generate power anymore. And there's not going to be any water for Las Vegas and Phoenix, and Lake Powell as well. These two reservoirs with these giant dams on them that are capturing the water from the Colorado River. And then the farmers and the irrigation upstream of there is a big deal. But there's 300 miles of river after Lake Mead before the Colorado River gets to the Gulf of California, which it never does. For years, the river dries up before it ever empties into the Gulf of California. And so what we want to do is we want to tell the story about the lower Colorado, the extreme lower Colorado, the last 250 miles. What's happening there? What's the conditions of the river like there? And is it really a river if it doesn't actually make it to its endpoint? If it dries up, it shouldn't management and water policy and water use be aimed at keeping water in the river at every stage of the rivers. So that's where we want to go, to the lower Colorado River.
The lower Colorado Lake.
Lake, the Lake Havasu is the last. I think it's called Havasu. It's the last dam on the river. Below there, there's still river. Some gets diverted to irrigation, and then again, there's supposed to be an estuary at the Gulf of California that it doesn't exist anymore. So we want to tell that story.
So how can people help? How do you get your volunteers?
So I've got one guy who's helped out with Puget Sound a little bit. He's got a kayak that he's taken out, and we've loaned a camera to him, and we've loaned cameras to others. But we've kind of closed down our citizen science program during this transition until we can get an operational budget for it and make sure we're doing it right. So I wouldn't want to get anyone involved in mapping Puget Sound right now or other places, just because I don't have the resources to really follow through and get that done right. But it's not going to be long. We'll put a link to the website and contact information in the chat, and certainly please send us a note and say, hey, I'm interested, and we can put you on a list and get back in touch with you once we get things rolling.
Great. Yeah. Just can't do it now, but there will eventually be more opportunities.
Within months, not years.
So if anyone has any more questions, looks like just people thanking you for sharing such valuable data. And we'll post the links in the chat on Zoom, and I think Miranda will post them on Facebook as well, so you can go visit the website and try and find that boat.
Yeah, that derelict vessel in Stockton Island. You can't have you can't do it all. And if you find it, you sign up and create a tag and tag it so that I can navigate to it easily next time I want to talk about it.
For the next presentation, you'll have the tag. So thank you again, Brian, for being our Discovery Speaker Series. That was such an amazing presentation and such a cool database for anyone and everyone to use to help protect our waterways.
Well, I certainly appreciate you guys having me, and thanks to everyone who came and checked it out. I hope you enjoyed it, and please, again, feel free to contact me, Brian at earthviewsociety.org. I'll leave it in the chat, and let's talk more about what your thoughts are about Puget Sound and mapping.
Sounds great. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming on via Zoom or checking us out via Facebook Live. Great questions. And again, you can follow us on social media to hear when our next one is, which will be December 1st at 6:30 p.m. You can follow us on social media or check our website when we'll post about who our next speaker is. And then you can also send us your coloring pages. Today I chose watercolors. Send us those if you did them. And then thanks again for joining, and I hope you all have a great rest of your evening.